I remember the day I finally decided to confront the truth like it was yesterday. For years, I had carried this gnawing suspicion about my father, a shadow I could not shake. Whispers of things that did not sit right. I thought I knew him, thought I understood the man who raised me, but the truth had been waiting, quietly in the background, like a predator stalking its prey. It began with a file I stumbled upon while cleaning out the attic. Dusty boxes labeled in his precise handwriting, some decades old, some more recent. I had always been curious about his work, a mix of business and investments that he claimed were complicated adult stuff. But one envelope stood out, marked simply, confidential. My heart hammered, not just with fear, but with the kind of thrill that comes when you sense the world you know is about to unravel. Inside, I found bank statements, contracts, and letters, enough to trace patterns I was never meant to see. The more I read, the colder it got, the more my stomach sank. My father, the man I trusted, had been hiding things that could ruin lives, mine included if revealed the wrong way. I had to be careful. I had to be smart. But I also had to act. I started documenting everything. Dates, names, amounts, locations, every small detail stitched together a picture that was horrifying in its clarity. I could feel the walls of my childhood home closing in as I connected the dots, realizing the web of deception extended beyond our family. Friends, neighbors, business partners, some unknowingly complicit, others fully aware. The betrayal was staggering. Then came the confrontation. I invited him to lunch under the guise of a casual family meeting. The restaurant was quiet, a neutral ground where I could control the conversation. I watched him order, the familiar confidence in his mannerisms, the little smirk that I had once thought endearing. But today it felt like armor. I started slow, careful, mentioned things I heard, questions I wondered about. He laughed at first, dismissing me, the way adults often do when a child speaks truths they cannot yet comprehend. But I persisted. I presented facts, calmly, without accusation, just observation. His face shifted subtly, first a flicker of unease, then a tightening around his eyes. He knew I was serious. The next hour was a battle of wits. He tried deflection, charm, gaslighting me into doubt. "You are imagining things," he said. "You are too young to understand business." But I had evidence, photographs, documents, digital records. I could see the cracks forming in his armor. Each piece of truth I laid bare, prying open the walls he had built around himself. And then the confession. Not an apology, not an explanation, just an acknowledgement. The weight of years pressing down in a single quiet admission. It was chilling, seeing a man reduced to that moment of raw vulnerability, knowing the consequences of his choices were finally surfacing. My father, the man who had seemed untouchable, had been undone by his own secrets. I left that day with a strange mix of sorrow and vindication. I had loved this man, respected him, and still, I had to protect myself and those I cared about. The truth was out, but the aftermath had only begun. I contacted authorities, legal advisors, and those affected, navigating the fallout with a precision that was almost clinical. My father's empire, once untouchable, began to crumble quietly, methodically. The most shocking part was not the deception itself, but the way my family reacted. My mother, once submissive, suddenly saw me in a new light. Fear, respect, maybe a little envy. Siblings, cousins, friends, some turned away, unwilling to confront the reality. Others approached cautiously, grateful I had acted when no one else dared. And me, I changed. There is no going back once you see the darkness hidden behind familiar faces. I learned who I could trust, who I could not, and most importantly, that silence is a dangerous luxury. I still wrestle with guilt, with the loss of innocence, with the knowledge that the man I called father was flawed in ways I could never have imagined. But I also learned strength, courage, and the importance of confronting evil when it hides behind love and trust. The day I exposed him, I walked out of that room no longer as a daughter afraid of her father's wrath, but as a woman claiming her power, her voice, and her life back. And though the path ahead is uncertain, though family bonds have been tested beyond repair, one thing is clear: the truth, once unearthed, has a way of setting even the most trapped souls free. I still see him sometimes, in old photographs and passing memories, but I no longer feel the need to forgive him. Not yet, perhaps never. The silence of years has been broken, and in that breaking, I found not just revenge, but clarity, survival, and the courage to live on my own terms. It is haunting, yes, to realize someone you loved could hide such darkness, but it is also empowering, knowing that you survived it, confronted it, and emerged unbroken. The secrets that once threatened to consume me are now tools, reminders of what I can endure, what I can overcome, and how fragile the illusion of family can be when built on lies. And so the story ends not with forgiveness, not with reconciliation, but with a quiet victory, the kind that whispers in the night, reminding me that truth has a power far beyond anger, far beyond betrayal, and far beyond even the deepest love. The darkness my father hid has been exposed, and in that exposure, I have finally found the light. I walk forward carrying the scars, the lessons, and the knowledge that some secrets are not meant to stay buried, and that sometimes the only way to survive a family's shadow is to shine your own light so brightly that the shadows have nowhere to hide. The day I exposed my father's dark secret, I also exposed the fragile myth of safety within family ties. And though the aftermath has been complicated, painful, and lonely at times, I would not change a single choice. Because in facing the truth, I discovered something far more valuable than revenge: my own strength, my own voice, and my own freedom. I uncovered the rest of the truth that night, the one my father had buried beneath decades of charm and lies. It began with the files hidden in the old safe, the one in his study he never locked, because he thought I would never look. But I had been waiting for this moment for years, watching, learning, understanding the patterns of his deception. The numbers, the accounts, the transfers, they all painted a picture far darker than I had imagined. I started by piecing together the financial trail, each document a confession in itself. My father had built his empire on exploitation, on people who trusted him blindly. He had hidden loans in offshore accounts, siphoning money from family members, charities, even his closest business partners. I felt a sick thrill as I realized just how much he had manipulated everyone, including me. Every smile, every word of praise, every handshake I had trusted had been part of a calculated performance. Then I turned to the personal side of his deception. Letters he had written to people who believed they were family allies, emails filled with threats and manipulation, photographs doctored to hide inconvenient truths. I scanned everything, making copies and backups on drives I had hidden in my own apartment. The longer I went, the more I saw a pattern: control, fear, and silence. His power had always depended on the illusion of loyalty and love. One night, I confronted him directly. I walked into his office, calm but resolute, carrying the evidence that would end his reign of manipulation. He smiled at me like he always did, that predatory, knowing smile. And I realized he thought I would crumble, that I would fall in line. "You do not understand what you are dealing with," he said, leaning back in his chair. But this time I did. I understood everything. I laid out the documents one by one, showing him the meticulous record of his crimes. I watched his expression shift from amusement to panic, to rage, and finally to fear. He tried to talk his way out, to charm and intimidate me, but every word he uttered only tightened the noose I had been weaving for months. I felt a strange mixture of satisfaction and sorrow. This was my father, the man who had shaped my childhood, who had dictated my life, yet here he was, powerless before the truth. I did not act impulsively. I knew the legal path would be slow, but it would be inevitable. I contacted lawyers I trusted, investigators, and even some of the people he had tried to exploit. Each confirmation they gave me was like a hammer striking against the wall of lies he had built. The more people who confirmed his actions, the more certain I became that this was bigger than revenge. It was justice. Meanwhile, he tried everything to regain control. He called me at all hours, sent messages pretending to be remorseful, tried to bribe and intimidate. I did not respond. I kept meticulous records of every attempt. I realized then that his true weakness had always been his arrogance. He believed he was untouchable, that his carefully constructed world would protect him. But I had the proof, and that proof was unstoppable. Weeks later, the first domino fell. One of his closest allies, a man who had once considered himself untouchable, was arrested after I turned over critical evidence. My father panicked. I watched from a distance, as the network he had spent decades cultivating began to collapse. Every call he made, every lawyer he hired, every attempt to manipulate outcomes only accelerated the unraveling. He was no longer in control. During this time, I had to navigate the emotional aftermath. My family, those who had blindly followed him, were in shock. Some turned against me, calling me ruthless and heartless. Others slowly began to understand. It was a delicate balance, maintaining my resolve while also protecting myself from the backlash. I could not afford to lose focus. His empire, built on fear and deception, was crumbling, and I had to see it through. Then came the confrontation I had anticipated but dreaded. A family meeting orchestrated by him, where he tried to salvage his reputation. I walked in, calm, carrying copies of everything. He began his speech, rehearsed words of love, regret, and denial. But I stopped him. I laid the evidence in front of everyone, methodically explaining the scale of his lies. The room fell silent. Faces that once smiled at him now looked at him with disbelief, disgust, and fear. He tried to deny, to twist the story, but no one believed him. Each person I had involved in the investigation had seen the proof, and each one now understood the magnitude of his deception. My father, the man who had controlled our lives with fear and manipulation, was now powerless. I could see it in his eyes, the realization that his empire was gone, that his illusions had crumbled, and that he could no longer dictate the narrative. After that, the legal process moved quickly. Authorities had all the evidence they needed. Accounts were frozen, assets seized, and investigations into fraudulent dealings began. My father tried to fight it, of course, hiring lawyers and using every tactic he knew, But the mountain of proof against him was insurmountable. I watched from the sidelines, knowing that justice was being served. Not in the form of vengeance, but in accountability. Emotionally, it was a storm. I felt relief, satisfaction, and a haunting sorrow all at once. Relief that the truth was finally out. Satisfaction that I had exposed the lies. And sorrow for the family who had been blindsided, who had trusted him blindly for years. The world we knew had shifted, and there was no going back. As the months passed, I began to rebuild. Relationships that had been strained or broken began to heal. Those who had supported me during the investigation remained close, and I realized that trust, once broken, could be rebuilt, but only slowly. I had become a different person through this ordeal, stronger, more vigilant, and more aware of the fragile nature of loyalty and power. In the end, the biggest revelation was not the crimes themselves, but the understanding that silence had been our enemy. My father had thrived because no one spoke out, because fear kept everyone compliant. By breaking that silence, by exposing the truth, I not only held him accountable, but also freed everyone else from his manipulation. The weight of years of deception lifted, leaving clarity, empowerment, and a hard-earned peace. The final confrontation, the legal victories, and the restoration of trust in my family did not erase the past, but they changed the trajectory of our lives. I realized that revenge was not the goal. It was the pursuit of truth, justice, and finally, freedom from a legacy of lies. My father's empire was gone, and with it, the shadows that had haunted us for decades. And as I stood one evening, looking out at the city lights from my apartment, I understood that the most powerful moments in life come not from anger or vengeance, but from clarity, courage, and the unwavering determination to confront the darkness head-on. My father had underestimated me, as he had always underestimated everyone, and that miscalculation had finally been his undoing. The silence that followed his downfall was deafening, but it was a silence filled with liberation. I had reclaimed my life, my family, and my future. And in that stillness, I finally whispered the words that had driven me for years. I am no longer afraid. I am no longer controlled, and I will never be silenced again.